This is the Global TV Demand Awards Virtual Festival. We have Jason here with us today. We are talking about The Last Dance, which is a frontrunner for two categories of the Global TV Demand Awards this year. It is one of the most in-demand TV shows for documentary series and for series debut, excuse me. And what's exciting about that is that the Global TV Demand Awards are the first and only data-backed award show. So Jason, you might not be familiar with this, but it is not based on voting committees or judging panels. What we do at Peer Analytics is measure audience demand for content. So we're talking about billions of data points all over the world. It is a global event. Where we're measuring audience interactions and activity around The Last Dance. That is how we're able to quantify this show as one of the most popular in the world for 2020. So we want to talk to you a little bit about that today, and learn, more about what it's like and how to create one of the most popular shows. So I am Rebekah Zabarsky, the executive producer of the Global TV Demand Awards, and I have Steve Langdon here, one of Peer Analytics regional directors. I'm gonna let him kick off the conversation with a few questions.
Yeah, sure. Look, Jason, congrats on the worldwide success of the series. We can share some numbers today, but we'd really much rather talk about the content, but some numbers. So we track over 10,000 television shows in our systems daily, and as Rebekah said, we track about 3.5 billion points of information coming in from all over the planet. So it's a very empirical way of looking at television shows. Now, globally for the year to date, The Last Dance has seen 23 times the demand of one of our average shows, and at one point it was 43 times the average show. Now, to put that in context, The Last Dance, we were tracking a show called Tiger King at the start of the year that I'm sure you're familiar with. Mm-hmm. And The Last Dance was the show that knocked Tiger King off its perch in the US and then followed globally. So first question, did you expect the global success of The Last Dance? Obviously, it's a huge story, the one that you were tasked to tell. Did you expect the global success, or were you totally taken by surprise?
I think the circumstances dictated the success of our show and a lot of shows during this global lockdown that we're still in to this day. It was striking to me as we were doing media for this in April and May when the show was premiering, to talk to folks like yourself on the other side of the world or another, completely countries where they didn't speak English. And I was speaking of one person from Malaysia and one person from Vietnam, then a person from Spain, then a person from Chicago, all in the same hour, oftentimes. And that really drove home that the entire world was all holed up in their kitchens and living rooms and other makeshift offices. It wasn't just the people in the States where we're used to seeing, the nightly news and things like that. Mm. I picture people in Australia, tanning at Bondi Beach and doing things like that. And it really drove home that everybody was stuck inside. So there's no way we could have anticipated the quite literal captive audience that we had. But it's also, Netflix, especially being a partner in this, they were really emphasizing that this was going to be a global event for them, and that we needed to, some things that may be simple for an American sports fan, such as knowing who Scottie Pippen is, or that Phil Jackson was the coach and what his background was. We really had to, our editors and our producers and myself, we always pictured, we used to have this kind of fictional 19-year-old Parisian or 16-year-old Japanese kid who didn't know anything, and telling the story to them, but also keeping the audience who knew all those basics stimulated as well. So it was a bit of a juggling act. But as far as the interest, Michael speaks for himself, and Michael's brand and just that logo speaks for itself. So it shows you how globally relevant he remains. But of course, none of us could have seen the circumstances that resulted in the kind of viewership numbers that we had.
Yeah, I think that nails it on the head. We saw during the lockdowns, we saw shows that were nostalgic rise to the top of our charts, shows that hadn't been seen for a while rise to the top of our charts. Escapism, shows that really allowed people to escape. and shows that inspired people were looking for inspiration. And we think that your show definitely inspired people and took them back to that time. Now, overall, during lockdown and actually this year to date, we've seen a 100% uplift in demand for sports documentaries, which has been led by The Last Dance. Now, obviously, to your point, you can apportion that to the whole world being locked up and being starved of sports. But do you see that as a long-term trend just kicking off, that people are far more interested in the stories behind the sports that they love? And do you see that continuing?
I hope so. I've always been attracted to sports stories, not because of what happens in between the lines or just the ball going through the hoop, but because I think that it's such a useful lens through which to view society and to view our relationships with each other. And you know, I say this, not to be judgmental, but I feel bad for people who aren't sports fans, who don't have that experience that I get to have with my parents and my brothers and my friends from home. I'm a Patriots fan and a Red Sox fan. I'm a Bostonian. It's not that I care so much about the Patriots scoring more points than somebody else. It's that the closer they get to the Super Bowl, the better a chance there is that I'm going to go to Boston and spend that Sunday with my family and friends and experience that with everyone. So it's a sense of community. It's a sense of belonging, and it's part of our identity. Where I was from growing up. So I think that when people, the best compliment we can get, and we've heard it a lot, been lucky enough to hear it a lot this year, is when people say, I'm not even a sports fan, but I loved the show because it was about human beings. I always talk about de-iconizing characters and making icons into human beings. And so many of our sports heroes are icons, and we see them as, at times infallible. And of course, everybody, there's good and bad parts to everybody. There's fallible and infallible parts to each of us. Yeah. And I love examining that. It's just a way to examine the human condition that I've always been attracted to.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Now we look at travelability. So we look at how a show travels around the world, and we index that to its home country. And it was off the charts for The Last Dance. Now, some of that you can say you could apportion to the fact that you had a very clever release strategy. You released early on ESPN and then released worldwide on Netflix. But I tell you, we track a lot of shows that go on Netflix and do not travel well around the globe. So apart from what you've already mentioned about the brand of Michael himself, what are the factors that you think the genes that kind of made it travel so far around the world?
I think relatability and the depth and breadth of the characters that we had. We had, if you want to make the analogy of superheroes, you had the Batman in Michael, you had the Robin in Scotty, you had the Joker in Dennis Rodman, you had this kind of Zen master. I don't know how he fits into that universe, but this Zen master who was able to pull all of these characters together and to maximize their abilities in Phil Jackson. You had the foil and Jerry Krause, who was seen as kind of a villain within that locker room, and they were all playing against him. I think that all of us have experienced something like that in our lives. We've all experienced the boss that we didn't think appreciated us enough. We've all thought that we were, maybe better than we were getting credit for. Maybe we wanted more credit than we deserved. All of us, even the Chicago Bulls, who were seen as the pinnacle of competitors athletically and culturally, we can see ourselves in them. So it's really, I think if it was just about Michael, it wouldn't be nearly as captivating as it was when people see this dynamic and they see this dysfunctional family trying to come together and accomplish something.
Yeah. Terrific. Thank you. Rebekah.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, just in terms of the travelability and how many audiences everywhere fell in love with this story, if we kind of transition more to the storytelling aspect of it and the series and the documentary kind of approach that you took, how did the idea come about? Tell us a little bit more about the genesis of this.
Well, the idea to capture all of that season on film came from a guy named Andy Thompson, who's a longtime producer for decades at the NBA now. He's the uncle of Klay Thompson and the brother of Michael Thompson, former Laker, and Adam Silver, who was then the president of NBA Entertainment. He's now, of course, the commissioner. And they knew that everyone could see the writing on the wall that this was going to be Michael's final season with the Bulls, and thus the final season of that Bulls dynasty. So win or lose, they had the foresight to realize that something historic was going to happen that year if they lost it, if they managed to win a sixth one. So they convinced Michael and Phil Jackson, and thus the Bulls, to let them embed cameras for most of the season, almost all of the season. And then those tapes lied dormant for over 15 years. It was always taped filmed under the agreement that Michael and the NBA would both have to agree that this could be released to the public. And for whatever reason, I was brought in after Michael agreed to participate. So I can't speak to why he finally agreed to do it. I know that Michael he very much, as we examined in the 10th episode, lives in the present tense and lives on the day of. So he could wake up and feel like today's the right day. And if the right phone call is made to him, he might take a puff of his cigar and say, yeah, let's do it. So I don't think a lot more thought went into it than that for him. But they lied there for 15 years. And it took much longer to get this thing to the starting line, because it took 20 years for us to actually start working on this thing from 98 to 2018. But even from the time it was first brought to me, it took 2 years for all the powers that be to come to an agreement on how they were going to release this thing and distribute it, and how they were going to cut up not only the financial pie, but the creative, logistic, promotional pies with $4 billion, multi-billion-dollar entities involved. It takes a lot of time. So I actually had time to go off and make another documentary for HBO called Andre the Giant, finished that, came all the way back, and they still were dotting their I's and crossing their T's. And then we finally got to work in January of 2018. So it's a long answer, but it was a long process. It took almost as long to get to the starting line those 2 years that it did to make the actual 10 episodes of TV, which is a lot.
The way that you structured the documentary with this kind of concurrent timeline of past and present, you talked about how you had this dearth of footage that you had to go through. I want to know a little bit more about the challenges that you faced when you were editing and, making those decisions, what to include, what not to include. Tell us about that.
It was hard because we had, in total, they filmed just under 500 hours of that season in 97, 98. And we had over 10,000 hours of footage in our project, in our edit rooms. So if you think we only had 10 of those hours, it was 1,000th of everything you see was going to make it into our final cut. So there was a lot of sifting and a lot of digging. And we had an incredible team that was on this and really created a workflow of unprecedented levels to get this thing done, so that if I said, or another producer said, we need a shot of Michael looking frustrated in 1990 on the road, they could come up with it right then. It was really remarkable that way. As far as how to decide what goes in and what goes out, we knew that it was determined before I even got on board, or my team got on board, that it was called The Last Dance. So thus it has to be about the 97, 98 season. So we always thought of it from day one as looking at the dynasty through the lens of that season. And of course, it's going to star Michael. But we always, as I said before, we wanted it to be more than just a Michael Jordan documentary. This is a snapshot that we're capturing in that one season. But we're really talking about the pursuit of greatness and the price of greatness. And that goes for Michael to Scotty all the way down to Steve Kerr and some of those other guys. It was difficult because there were people who played significant roles on that team, like Luke Longley, Steve from Australia, who we didn't, in Luke's case, we didn't even get to interview him. And in the case of a guy like Ron Harper, who was a key member of that team, we didn't have the time, as ridiculous as it sounds to have a 10-hour series, we didn't have the time to really dive into his backstory the way that he deserved. So I do regret that, because a lot of guys there, I'm sure, watched and thought, I had a lot to do with this too. But we were answering to a lot of masters and answering to a lot of people who had a lot of who had different agendas on what this thing should be. So the NBA and Jump 23, which is Michael's company, and Netflix and ESPN all had different visions for what they thought this should look like and feel like and sound like. And us being the fifth entity, we were not quite billionaires, but we felt just as passionately, if not more passionately, about what this thing should be, because we were the ones who were living with it day in and day out for years. So it was difficult to balance what goes in and what goes out, but we were working at such a fast pace that you had to make a decision and just move on.
That's a really interesting point about the format of the series. We speak to, obviously, a lot of television companies, and they say to us, if someone brings us story, we no longer ask for a specific format. Like we'll let the story breathe, whether it's a short form, whether it's like a feature length, whether it's 15 episodes. Did you have that kind of brief? Did they say this has got to be a 10 episode series, or did it kind of grow as you built out what you've called the building blocks of the show?
No, that was determined from the get-go that it was 10 episodes. And even more so, it was that it has to be exactly 50 minutes per episode.
Oh, okay.
So I always liken it to people if I say, pick a subject, World War II, and it has to be 500 pages long, your book, and it has to be 10 chapters, and each chapter has to be 50 pages long. Well, some chapters deserve to be 60 and some deserve to be 31. But that's not the way TV works. TV is unkind, especially when there's advertisers involved in commercial blocks. So we were really hemmed in to making it, some of those earlier episodes, especially when we're laying the groundwork and giving you backstories of people, those could have been an hour and a half to 2 hours long because we had so much. We interviewed 105 people for this doc, and we had hundreds of hours of original interviews from those 105. And we had so many stories that we could have told. So it was difficult to make determinations as to what stays in and what we have to kill. But like I said, you just make that decision and move on because the clock was always ticking.
Maybe an opportunity for an uncut in the near future.
Oh, God. I think I'm all done. Maybe somebody else can fill in for me.
Or maybe not. What's next? Like, obviously, we don't need a global exclusive from you, but like this obviously looks like it's inspired you, and the story of Andre the Giant, which I really enjoyed, was a phenomenal story of someone's life that when you take the camera away. More of these for you? Is this like, does this fire you up to like tell more stories? What's next?
Absolutely. Not necessarily the exact same story every time, because all of us want to do something different with our work and something that gets us out of bed in the morning. But I come from a storytelling family. I come from a family of people who entertained each other and ate dinner together every night, and we had to keep each other entertained. I'm the youngest of three boys, so maybe I was a little bit more vocal and using my mouth more than my muscles. But yeah, I'll never stop wanting to do this. The exciting thing now is to explore opportunities maybe outside of sports into the music genre and true crime and social justice, and then to explore narrative opportunities as well, to read scripts and think. I've always thought, that's been one of my dreams is to tell what my niece calls is to do a real movie. If she could be in a movie of mine and make sure it's a real movie.
That's great.
But to do that and to think, I wish this person said this at this point, or I wish this happened in this story, it would have been so much better. Well, when you have a blank page, you can make anything you want happen. So I'm just extremely thankful for the team that we assembled and working with that team again on bigger and better stories.
I just have another question. A lot of people watching this will be producers or content creators themselves. So what kind of advice do you have for them, whether they're making documentaries or narrative films or anything that your niece might be watching in the future?
There's a lot of advice. I learned, I've always believed this because I came in 22 years ago. So there were no shortcuts, but I learned on this one, especially, that there are no shortcuts. There's no way except for reading for 2 years, 10,000 pages of articles and books and magazine pieces and listening to every interview that's been done with all of these people. There's no way to prepare yourself to do the amount of work we had to do without having that bedrock. So just like if you're playing the piano, you need to learn your scales. It may not be too exciting to have a stack of books in front of you and say, I'm going to sit in my apartment for 3 or 4 months and get this research done, but you have to do it, because in order to be able to pivot during these shoots, and if someone wants to go somewhere during an interview, we have 5.5 hours with Phil Jackson. And as you can imagine, Phil Jackson went all over the map with what he wanted to talk about. So in order to make sure that you can keep up and that you can pivot with these people and stay with them and prove yourself to them. I think a lot of these interviews, Michael included, these guys are competitive and they want to know what you know. And there's little tricks that they'll play to you know, saying something incorrectly or asking you if you remember a fact like that. So going in, it's like when you go into a test and you know you've studied, you know that you're going to be able to answer any question. So I think that the preparation is by far the key to this. The fun part is to improvise and to be creative and to make a few choices in the edit room and go to dinner and come back and see which one you like the best after getting away from it for an hour. The tough part, the grind, but this is where you separate the real ones from the fake ones, is in the preparation and in the work that you put in to get to that point.
Fantastic. Do your homework.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Jason. What's that?
Eat your vegetables.
That's right. Jason, thank you so much. This has been delightful. We are excited to announce the winners of the Global TV Demand Awards in January. Thank you again. This has been such a pleasure. And fingers crossed, The Last Dance, most in-demand documentary series and series debut of 2020. Thank you so much and best of luck for your next projects.